The thing about working the early morning shift at a courier depot in the middle of a Toronto January is that nobody warns you about the cold, not the outside cold. Cecily Hargrove had grown up in Sudbury. She knew about cold. She meant the cold inside the building, the kind that settled into the concrete floor and crept up through the soles of your boots while you sorted packages at 5 in the morning and tried to remember why you'd thought this job was a good idea. It paid $14 above minimum wage. That was why. That, and the fact that her bakery loan had just been declined for the second time, and her savings account had $342 in it, and the little kitchen she rented on weekends to test her recipes wasn't going to pay for itself. Cecily had a plan. The plan just required money she didn't have yet, so she showed up at the depot at 4:45 every weekday morning, sorted parcels until noon, then went home to her apartment on Lansdowne and baked until her hands ached. She had notebooks full of recipes. She had a name picked out. She had a logo sketched on a napkin pinned above her kitchen table. What she did not have was any reasonable expectation that the plan was going to work, but she kept showing up anyway. It was on a Tuesday in early February that her supervisor, a brisk man named Garrett who communicated primarily through clipboard gestures, handed her a stack of priority deliveries for the downtown financial district. "Special handling," he said. "Signature required on all of them. Do not leave at reception." Cecily loaded the parcels into the insulated courier bag, memorized the addresses, and took the subway south. The first 3 deliveries went smoothly. The 4th address was a tower on Bay Street, 52 floors of glass and steel that reflected the gray February sky back at itself with what Cecily privately felt was excessive confidence. She checked in with security, clipped on a visitor badge, and rode the elevator to the 38th floor. The reception area was the kind of place designed to make you feel slightly underdressed. White marble, a single orchid on the front desk, a receptionist with very good posture who looked at Cecily's bright orange courier jacket the way you might look at a bird that had inexplicably flown in through a window. "Delivery for a Mr. Aldridge," Cecily said, reading from her clipboard. "Signature required." The receptionist checked her screen. "Mr. Aldridge is in a board meeting. I can wait. It may be some time. That's fine." Cecily sat down on a very white chair and pulled out her phone. She had a new focaccia variation to think through. She'd been trying to get the rosemary distribution right for 3 weeks. She was 40 minutes into a fairly productive mental experiment involving olive oil ratios when the boardroom doors swung open and the meeting apparently concluded, because the hallway filled with men in expensive suits moving with the particular efficiency of people whose time is worth a lot. The receptionist waved Cecily forward. She approached the group, checked the name on her clipboard, and addressed the man nearest the door. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Mr. Aldridge?" "That's me," said a voice to her left. She turned. The man who had spoken was maybe mid-30s, dark-haired, with the slightly rumpled look of someone who had started the day in a very nice suit and spent the last several hours not quite living up to it. His tie was loosened. There was a pen tucked behind his ear. He was holding a coffee that he looked like he had forgotten he was holding. "James Aldridge?" she confirmed. "That's also me," he said. He had the faint, dry tone of a person who found most things mildly amusing but was too tired to show it. She held out her clipboard. "Signature here, please." He signed without looking at the form. She handed him the parcel, a flat, padded envelope, and he tucked it under his arm and thanked her with the automatic courtesy of someone who had been raised well. She was turning to leave when someone behind her said very loudly, "Oh, good grief, is that from Fletcher's?" She stopped, turned back. An older man, gray-haired, the unmistakable bearing of a person who had been important for a very long time, was staring at the padded envelope under Aldridge's arm with an expression of naked disappointment. "That's the Moreau contract," the older man said. Aldridge frowned, looked at the envelope, looked at his clipboard. "No, the Moreau contract is coming through legal." He glanced at Cecily. "What courier company are you with?" she told him. "What depot?" "Etobicoke South." Something crossed his face. A small calculation. "That's not our usual service zone." Cecily checked her paperwork. The address was correct. The name was correct. The order number matched her batch. But now that she looked more carefully at the order code, she noticed that the client account number had a digit transposed, a 6 where there should have been a 9. She had delivered to the wrong James Aldridge. There were apparently 2 of them in the Toronto financial district. The one who was supposed to receive this parcel was 4 blocks south. "I'm so sorry," she said, and she meant it. "I'll need to take that back." Aldridge handed it over without complaint. "Honest mistake," he said. "These things happen." This was generous of him because her scanner had beeped an anomaly warning when she'd first logged the parcel that morning, and she had, in the press of the early start and the cold and the rosemary focaccia problem, dismissed it without investigating. She tucked the parcel back into her bag and retreated to the elevator. She was on the ground floor, cursing herself quietly, when she heard the elevator doors open behind her and footsteps cross the marble lobby. "Wait, Cecily!" She turned around. It was him. James Aldridge, still holding his forgotten coffee, tie still loose, now also without the pen behind his ear. "How did you know my name?" she asked. "It was on your badge." She looked down. It was, in fact, on her badge. "Right," she said. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. "I'd like to buy you a coffee." "To apologize for the mix-up. You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "That was my mistake." "I know," he said, "but I kept you waiting for 40 minutes and then sent you out in the cold on a wrong delivery. It seems like the least I can do." She was due at the correct James Aldridge's office by 2 o'clock. It was 12:30. She had 90 minutes. "Okay," she said, "but somewhere close." They went to a place on King Street that she wouldn't ordinarily have walked into, the kind of cafe where the menu was written in chalk and the sandwiches cost $18. She ordered a black coffee. He ordered the same, looked at the pastry case, and without asking her said to the person behind the counter, "And one of those." The person behind the counter put a lemon tart on a small plate and slid it across. Aldridge carried both coffees and the tart to the table, set them down, sat across from her. "I don't want a lemon tart," she said. "It's for me," he said. "Do you want to split it?" "No, thank you." He ate a third of it in one bite and looked out the window at the gray street. "You work at the depot in Etobicoke," he said. "Morning shift, is that your main job?" She looked at him over her coffee cup. "Is this small talk, or is there a reason you're asking?" He smiled slightly. "Fair enough. The reason I'm asking is that you looked at that order code for about 2 seconds before you identified the transposition error. Most people wouldn't have caught it at all. I noticed the account number didn't match the zone this morning," she said. "I should have flagged it then." "What stopped you?" She wasn't sure why she answered honestly. Maybe because he wasn't making a performance of asking. "I was thinking about something else." "What were you thinking about?" "Bread." He paused with the fork halfway to the tart. "Bread, focaccia, specifically. I'm trying to get the rosemary distribution right." There was a small silence. "You bake," he said. "I'm trying to open a bakery," she said, which was not something she told most people, because most people responded with the particular brand of cautious enthusiasm that really meant that sounds very hard and probably won't work. "What's stopping you?" he asked. "Money? Ah, yeah." He finished the lemon tart. She watched him eat it with the slightly critical eye she applied to all baked goods professionally. The pastry was fine. The curd was overworked. "I could do better than that," she said, not really meaning to say it out loud. He looked at the empty plate. "Better than the tart? The curd is grainy. They overworked the eggs." He pushed the plate slightly to one side and looked at her with the full, direct attention that she would later learn was one of the more unnerving things about him. "What's your bakery called?" "Hargrove's," she said. "Nothing original. It's my last name. What do you make?" "Everything, sourdoughs mainly, some pastry. I've been developing a line of savory baked goods, things you can eat for breakfast that aren't sweet. There's a gap in the market for it here. People want something substantial in the morning, not just a croissant." He was quiet for a moment. "Why have the banks said no?" She stared at him. "How did you know the bank said no?" "You said money is what's stopping you," he said. "If you had savings, you'd be using them. If you had family money, you probably wouldn't be sorting parcels at 4 in the morning. So the bank said no." It was very precise reasoning delivered very casually. She filed this away. "Twice?" she said. "They don't love the cafe and bakery market. Too much competition, too high a failure rate." "They're not wrong about the failure rate," he said. "They're not wrong about the competition either," she said. "But they're applying the same calculus to every small food business without looking at the differentiation. I'm not opening a cafe. I'm opening a wholesale and retail bread operation with a small cafe component. The revenue model is different." He folded his hands on the table. He had the look of a person who was listening very carefully and had decided not to speak until he had something worth saying. She found this unusual. In her experience, men in expensive suits tended to fill silences. "Send me your business plan," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your business plan," he said. "Send it to me." He took out a business card, actual cardstock engraved, the old-fashioned kind, and slid it across the table. "I run a firm that does early-stage investment in food and hospitality. We don't usually look at anything this small, but what you just described isn't actually small if the wholesale model holds up." Cecily looked at the card, then at him. You're not doing this because you feel guilty about the wrong delivery. No, he said. And you're not doing it to be nice. I'm not especially nice, he said. I'm doing it because you just gave me a more coherent 3-sentence pitch for a bakery business than I got this morning in 40 minutes of boardroom presentations. Send me the plan. She picked up the card. Aldridge Capital. James Aldridge, managing partner. Okay, she said. I'll send it. She delivered the correct package to the correct James Aldridge at 1:58, 2 minutes ahead of schedule. She did not tell that James Aldridge about the other one. She took the subway back to Etobicoke, went home, sat at her kitchen table and looked at the card for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and emailed the business plan. She expected nothing. She had sent business plans before, to the banks, to her aunt who had money and meant well, to a small business development program that had thanked her warmly and offered her a workshop on social media marketing. She had learned to protect herself from expecting responses. His reply came at 11:40 that night. I've read this. I have questions. Are you available Thursday morning? She typed back, I start work at 4:45. He typed back, I meant Thursday afternoon. She had the afternoon off on Thursdays. She almost wrote back to tell him this and then decided, for reasons she couldn't have articulated precisely, to make him wait until morning. She answered at 5 a.m. from the depot between parcels. Thursday afternoon works. The meeting on Thursday was at his office on Bay Street. Not the 38th floor this time. His actual office, on the 44th, smaller than she'd expected and considerably messier. There were papers everywhere, a whiteboard covered in numbers, a half-eaten granola bar on the corner of the desk that looked like it had been there since at least Tuesday. He had a colleague with him, a woman named Priya who had the steady, evaluative gaze of someone who had heard a great many pitches and remembered all of them. Priya asked most of the questions. Aldridge, James, she had started thinking of him as though she didn't say it yet. Mostly listened and occasionally said something that reframed the entire conversation. They went through the business plan line by line. Priya challenged her on the wholesale projections. Cecily defended them with the 3 restaurants she'd already spoken to informally, 2 of whom had said they'd sign supply agreements if she could demonstrate consistent volume. You have letters of intent? Priya said. I have emails, Cecily said. I can get letters of intent within 2 weeks. Priya looked at James. James looked at his whiteboard. The Etobicoke location you've identified for the production kitchen, he said. The lease terms, you negotiated those yourself? Yes, they're good terms, I know. He looked at her then, and there was something in his expression that wasn't exactly a smile but was adjacent to one. You know you're supposed to be modest in these meetings. I got good lease terms, she said. Being modest about it doesn't make them less good. Priya made a small sound that might have been suppressed laughter. They didn't give her an answer that day. They told her 2 weeks, which she knew from experience could mean anything, and she went back to Etobicoke and the early shift and the rosemary problem, and she tried very hard not to think about it. She thought about it constantly. She was at the kitchen she rented on a Saturday morning, pulling the 4th test batch of the focaccia from the oven when her phone rang. James Aldridge. She let it ring once more while she set the pan on the cooling rack, then answered. We're in, he said. She stood very still in the rented kitchen with the bread smell around her and the February light coming through the small window above the sink. In for how much? She said, because she had learned to be precise, he told her. It was more than she had asked for. That's more than I asked for, she said. I know, he said. The extra is for the 2nd production unit you're going to need in year 2. You didn't include it in the plan because you didn't want to seem overconfident, but you're going to need it. The wholesale model scales faster than you've projected. She sat down on the stool near the cooling rack. You read the plan very carefully. I read plans very carefully, he said. That's the job. There was a pause and then she said, because it seemed important to be honest about this from the beginning. I'm going to make this work. I know you are, he said. That's why we said yes. She emailed him the formal acceptance that evening. She was professional about it. She included a timeline, a proposed term sheet response, and a note about the expected date of the letters of intent from the restaurant contacts. At the bottom, she added, also, I figured out the focaccia. He wrote back 15 minutes later, send me a piece. She wrote back, you'll have to come and get it. She had no idea why she wrote that. She almost deleted it. She sent it anyway. He showed up at the rented kitchen the following Saturday at 10 in the morning with 2 coffees from the place on King Street. He tried the focaccia. He didn't say anything for a moment. Well, she said, it's very good, he said. I know, she said. He smiled, properly this time. It changed his face considerably. The investment closed in March. By April, Cecily Hargrove had the lease on the production kitchen in Etobicoke, a part-time baker named Kwame who could work mornings, and supply agreements signed with 3 restaurants and 1 hotel kitchen. She quit the depot on a Friday after the morning sort. Garrett, the supervisor, shook her hand and said she'd been one of the good ones. She wasn't entirely sure what this meant, but she thanked him. The bakery opened in late May. Just the production side first. Wholesale only, no retail component yet. Focaccia, 3 kinds of sourdough, a seeded rye she'd been developing for 6 months, and a savory breakfast loaf with aged cheddar and black pepper that the hotel kitchen had specifically requested and which was becoming rather quickly the thing people talked about. James came to the production kitchen the morning of the first official delivery run. He stood out of the way while Cecily and Kwame loaded the van. He was drinking coffee from his thermos and looking at the shelves of proofing loaves with the focused attention he brought to everything, which Cecily had come to understand was not inspection but genuine interest. "Are you nervous?" he asked when she came back inside. "About the deliveries? About any of it?" She considered this. "I was nervous," she said. "For a long time I was very nervous. Now I'm just busy." "That's usually how it goes," he said. She'd been meaning to ask him something for a while and hadn't found the right moment. Mostly because there was never really a right moment when you were building a business from the ground up, and every conversation had about 6 other things competing for space in it. But he was just standing there with his thermos, not competing for space, and so she asked, "Why did you come down to the lobby that day after I left your office?" He was quiet for a second. "The lobby of the tower? Yes, you didn't need to. I had the parcel. I was leaving. There was nothing you needed from me." He looked at the proofing loaves for a moment. "You'd been sitting in that waiting room for 40 minutes without complaining," he said. "And then you figured out your own mistake before I had a chance to explain it. And then you apologized and turned to leave, and I thought..." He stopped. "What?" she said. "I thought that most people in that situation would have been embarrassed or defensive, or they would have made a thing of it," he said. "And you were just precise. You found the error, you acknowledged it, and you moved on. And I thought that was unusual. Unusual enough to chase someone into a lobby," she said. "I didn't chase," he said. "I walked at a normal pace. You were holding a coffee you'd forgotten you were holding. I'd been in a meeting for 2 hours, James." He looked at her. It was the first time she'd used his name directly. They both noticed. "Yes," he said. "I thought it was worth finding out who you were." She nodded. Outside, Kwame honked the van horn. They were ready to go. "I have to go," she said. "I know." He picked up his jacket from the chair by the door. "Good luck today." "I don't need luck," she said. "I have good bread." He laughed. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh properly. She carried it with her in the van all the way to the first delivery. The summer was hard in the best possible way. Hard like building something is hard, where the work is enormous but the direction is right, and that makes all the difference. By August, Hargroves had 6 wholesale accounts and a small but persistent reputation among the chefs who cared about this kind of thing. A food writer for a Toronto magazine came to the production kitchen and wrote 4 paragraphs about the cheddar loaf. The hotel kitchen doubled its standing order. James was not a constant presence through this period. He was not that kind of investor. He had told her this at the beginning and she had appreciated it. He showed up when there was something to discuss, sent emails when there was something to read, and otherwise left her alone to run the thing she was building. But he was also, gradually, not only an investor. This happened in the way that most things happen. Not in a moment, but in the accumulation of small moments, each one individually insignificant and collectively something else entirely. There was the afternoon he arrived at the kitchen with a folder of lease comparisons for the retail space she was starting to think about, unprompted, because he'd been in the neighborhood looking at something else and had thought to pull the data. There was the time she called him at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday evening because the seeded rye had developed a crust problem, and she needed to talk through the variables. And he talked through them with her without once suggesting that this was not a normal use of a Wednesday evening. There was the Saturday morning he came to help move the new proofing rack and spent 3 hours rearranging the kitchen with her and Kwame, and did not once talk about the investment or the business or anything, except whether the rack should be near the window for temperature reasons or away from the window for draft reasons. He stayed for lunch. She made sandwiches on the day-old sourdough, and they ate standing up at the work table, and he said it was the best sandwich he'd ever had. And she said that was because the bread was good, and he said it wasn't only the bread. She didn't say anything to that, but she thought about it for the rest of the day. The complication arrived in September. in the form of a woman named Etobicoke Carver. Etobicoke was the co-founder of a competing hospitality investment firm, which was enough to make her professionally complicated. She was also, as it emerged very gradually and then all at once in the way these things always do, someone James had been engaged to for 8 months 3 years ago, which made her personally complicated. Cecily found this out not from James but from Priya, who mentioned it with the particular carefulness of someone who was not gossiping but felt that relevant context should be available. "She's been calling the office," Priya said. They were sitting in the small conference room off the main floor, going over the term sheet for Cecily's Series A. "She wants to talk to James about a co-investment. He hasn't returned her calls, that's his business," Cecily said. "I know," Priya said. "I'm just telling you." "Why are you telling me?" Cecily said. Priya looked at her with the steady gaze of someone who had watched several things develop and was choosing not to state the obvious out loud. "No reason," she said. The following week, Etobicoke Carver appeared at an industry event that Cecily attended because the hotel kitchen's executive chef had asked her to come. Cecily did not know this was going to happen. She was standing near the food display, evaluating the sourdough from whoever was supplying it, not bad, slightly underproofed, when a woman in a camel coat approached the table, picked up a piece of bread and said to no one in particular, "This is too dense." It was, in fact, too dense, Cecily agreed. "Cecily Hargrove," the woman said, turning. "Not a question." "Yes," Cecily said, "I've heard about you." Etobicoke Carver was blonde, composed, and had the manner of someone who was always very slightly assessing the room. "Your cheddar loaf is apparently quite good." "It is," Cecily said. There was a small pause. "James speaks highly of you," Etobicoke said. "He's a good investor," Cecily said. "He is," Etobicoke agreed with something in her tone that Cecily couldn't precisely identify. "Not hostile, not entirely warm, something navigational. He's also very selective about where he puts his time. He doesn't usually show up to help move furniture." Cecily held very still. "He mentioned that?" "He didn't need to," Etobicoke said. "Priya mentioned it. We have lunch occasionally." "Old habits." She looked at the food table. "I hope your retail space works out. The wholesale model is smart, but the margin improvement on retail is considerable if you get the location right." She picked up another piece of bread, reconsidered it, put it down. "It was nice to meet you," she said, and walked away. Cecily stood by the food table for a moment. Then she ate the underproofed sourdough, which was not as bad as Etobicoke had implied but definitely not great, and thought very carefully about several things at once. She called James that evening. He answered on the second ring. "I met Etobicoke Carver tonight," she said. A pause. "I see, she knew you'd helped move the proofing rack. I didn't tell her that." "I know, Priya did. They have lunch." Another pause, longer. "Cecily, I'm not asking about her," she said. "I want to ask you something else." "Okay. When we are having conversations," she said carefully. "Are we having 2 conversations, or 1? It took him a moment. "I think you know the answer to that. I'd like you to say it." "1, he said. "We're having 1 conversation. We've been having 1 conversation since February." She sat at her kitchen table, the one with the logo sketch pinned above it, the bakery logo, which was now also the logo on the van, and the supply labels and the little stickers on the bread bags. "Hargrove's." "Okay," she said. "Is that enough?" he said. "For now?" "For now," she said. She could hear him exhale. Not with relief exactly, with something that had been waiting. "The retail space on Roncesvalles," she said, because she was who she was and she could not let a business question sit unanswered. The landlord came back with revised terms. "Send them to me." "I'll send them tonight." "Cecily." "Yes, I'm glad I came down to the lobby." She looked at the logo sketch. "So am I," she said. "Good night, James." She sent him the lease terms. He replied 40 minutes later with notes and a counter-proposal. And, at the very bottom, beneath all the numbers and the legal language and the precise, careful reasoning that she had come to think of as simply the way his mind worked, "I'm looking forward to the cheddar loaf going retail. I intend to buy one every Saturday." She smiled at her screen for a long time. The Roncesvalles location opened in November. Not a cafe, that was still 2 years away, she was realistic, but a proper retail counter, open Thursday through Sunday, selling every loaf and every savory pastry she could produce. The line on the first Saturday went to the end of the block. Kwame, who had by now been promoted to head baker and was teaching her things about fermentation that she hadn't known she didn't know, stood in the kitchen doorway and said, simply, "There you go." James arrived at 11 after the first rush had cleared. He wore a Saturday jacket, not a work one, and he had his hands in his pockets and he looked at the queue. Still 10 people deep, even after 2 hours, with the expression Cecily had learned to read as genuine pleasure, which on his face was quiet and still and easily missed if you weren't paying attention. She handed him a cheddar loaf across the counter. He paid for it, full price. She had told him she wasn't going to give him special pricing, and he had said he wouldn't expect it. "Well," she said. He looked at the loaf, at the shop, at the chalk menu board she'd had a friend design, and the small handwritten signs explaining each bread, and the paper bags with the Hargrove stamp. "It's exactly what you said it would be," he said. "I know," she said. "You always know," he said, and his voice had something in it now that was not about the bakery at all. There were 3 people behind him in the queue. He stepped to the side, out of the way, with the good instincts of a person who understood when something was not about him. But he stayed. He sat at the one small table she'd put near the window. She'd told herself it was for wholesale clients, and she had known even then it was not. And he drank his coffee, and he read something on his phone, and every so often he looked up at the shop with that quiet expression, and Cecily, between customers, looked back. At 12:30, when the morning rush had finally quieted and Kwame had things under control in the back, she came out from behind the counter and sat across from him. "You've been here 2 hours," she said. "The coffee is good," he said. "We don't serve coffee." "You brought your own." "I know," he said. She looked at him across the small table by the window, the November street behind him, the bread smell around them both, the shop that was exactly what she had said it would be. "I think," she said slowly, "that you should have dinner with me, not as an investor, as something else." "I think so too," he said. "I'm going to be very busy," she warned. "I'm building a business. I'm not always going to be available." "I know that," he said. "I invested in the business. I read the projections." "James, I'm also building something," he said. "I understand busy." She nodded. Outside, 2 women were reading the menu board and pointing at things. One of them opened the door. The bell above it rang. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he agreed. She stood and went back behind the counter, and she smiled at the 2 women and asked what they'd like. And from the corner of her eye, she saw James Aldridge put his empty coffee thermos in his bag and pull on his jacket and step out into the gray November street with her cheddar loaf under his arm. And she thought, there it is, that's the thing I was building toward. Not just the shop, not just the bread, not just the plan that had lived in notebooks for 3 years and was finally undeniably real. All of it, the whole thing. The cold February morning and the wrong delivery and the lemon tart she hadn't eaten, and the lobby she hadn't expected him to follow her into, and the focaccia she'd finally gotten right, and the long year of building something from nothing, and the man who had read her business plan at 11:40 at night and understood what she meant before she'd finished saying it. All of it, she thought, watching the November street close behind him. Every single piece.